Good morning everyone. Hope you all are doing well. Today we will discuss about the topic Through the Eyes of the Travelers. It is a lesson picked up from the 12th NCERT book. So let us see what's there in the chapter. This is an introduction of the chapter where the different things what were taken into account in this chapter has been described about the women and men that traveled for the work, for food, okay, and then the merchants, the soldiers, the priests, the pilgrims that they traveled from place to place due to different accounts. Okay, here we can see this picture if it is clear. The palm leaf. What is this palm leaf? This is a very traditional thing which is there in our country, and here one of the traveler in his account has given a detailed account description of this palm. We'll discuss it as we go through the chapter. Okay, here we can see another very beautiful example, the coconut. This is again something very new to the travelers, was very new to the travelers that they have came to know in our country during their visit. First traveler that we are going to discuss is Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni was born in 973 in Qaziram, the present day Uzbekistan. It was an important center of learning and he received the best education that was available at that period of time. He learned Sanskrit, Syriac, Arabic, Persian, and he was also a great follower of the great philosopher Plato. He was a philosopher of Greek. He visited India during the period of Ghazni, that when he developed an interest in the country. This is not very unusual as it is said that Sanskrit works on astronomy, mathematics and medicine. That means he learned different subjects, okay, and showed interest in the teachings and learning methods of the country. Kitabul Hind. What is Kitabul Hind? It is the book that was written by Al-Biruni, or you can say the accounts. This is the account where he have written about all the different things, all the learnings, teachings, whatever he came to know in the country. He compiled it together and this was known as the Kitabul Hind, and it was written in Arabic in a very simple and lucid way so that the message or whatever writings was there could be delivered to the every people easily. Okay, it was divided into 80 chapters. That means as it is said that the book was divided into 80 chapters. That means everything it was written in detail and about all the accounts right from the tradition, food, religion, language, culture, customs, everything was divided into different groups in different chapters. Okay, yeah, as it is said here that in his book he wrote about religion, philosophy, festivals, astronomy, alchemy, customs, medicines, everything. Okay, he also adopted distinctive structure in each chapter beginning with question. That means he was very curious about the teachings, the learnings or whatever he found here. He therefore added questions to the texts also. Okay, and he has described it in Sanskrit tradition. That means most of his accounts were later on translated in Sanskrit and in many other languages. Al-Biruni also wrote in Arabic and was intended his work for people living along the frontiers of the subcontinent. He was familiar with the translations and adaptations of Sanskrit. That means earlier, as we know that Al-Biruni was a Persian traveler, he was not quite familiar with the Sanskrit language. But when after his visit, he came to stay with the Brahmanas, got education from them, learnings from them, and he quite developed a good interest in Sanskrit, and he was so deep in learning the Sanskrit that later on he had a very good command in the language. He was also familiar to adopt other languages like Pali and Prakrit also. What he did, he learned Sanskrit, he learned Pali, Prakrit, and then later on some of his accounts were also again translated in Persian from the Pali and Prakrit language. Next, the second traveler, Ibn Battuta. And why it is called Ibn Battuta Rihala? That means the book of Ibn Battuta was known as or was called Rihala. Let us see who was Ibn Battuta. he was a traveler from Morocco in the 14th century. That means he in the 14th century traveled wholly from Morocco and entered the continent. He was also from a very royal family. He got his good education, the best education that was present at that time. Okay, and true to the tradition of his family, Ibn Battuta received literary and scholastic education when he was quite young. That means he got his education in a very early age. Okay, unlike the other members of his class, Ibn Battuta considered experience gained through travelers to be more important source of knowledge than the books. He believed that instead of going through the books, it is much more better and interest if he travel the parts of the country or parts of the world and gain the knowledge physically. He set out for India in 1332 to 33. 1332 to 33. He made his pilgrimage trip to Mecca and had already extremely in Syria, Iran, Persia, Yemen, Oman and few other ports of the trading ports in the coast of Africa. That means before he set out his journey to India, he visited these places and also he went Mecca. Then, travelling over through Central Asia, Ibn Battuta reached Sindh in 1333. Sindh, a part of India. Okay. He heard about Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Who was Muhammad bin Tughlaq? We are all familiar with the name. He was a king. He was a ruler of. He was also as the Sultan of Delhi. Okay. He was a very well-known ruler of that period of time. He set out for Delhi through Multan and Uch. He set out Delhi through places of Multan and Uch. Then, when Muhammad bin Tughlaq came into know about Ibn Battuta, he was quite impressed by his reputation, okay, by his generous work, arts and letters, and then Ibn Battuta was later appointed as the Qazi or the advisory person of the Sultan's kingdom. Ibn Battuta in his accounts have also mentioned about the Malabar coast because he visited the Malabar coast, okay, through the central India, and then he went to Maldives where he stayed for 18 months. Okay, he mentioned Malabar coast. He set for Maldives and he lived there for 18 months, and eventually he decided to proceed Sri Lanka. That means we can say that Ibn Battuta, even after the visit in India, didn't stop here. He rather expanded more, okay, in the different parts. He then went back once more to the Malabar coast and Maldives, and then before resuming his mission to China, he visited Bengal and Assam. This is very interesting part of his travel. If we see, it is said that Ibn Battuta, after his visit in India, he set out to the Malabar coast, then he went to Maldives where he stayed for 18 months, and then he again came back. He visited Sri Lanka and then came back to Malabar coast again and Maldives. But before that, he also visited Bengal and Assam, even though he visited China also. But if we see a traveler right from Morocco, okay, he set out such a long journey. Again, then he came most of the parts of the India, and then he also visited Bengal and Assam. Assam is in the extreme northeast. Okay, we rarely find any traces. Sometimes it is when we talk about the Assam history, then we come to see things in a bigger way. But here, when this is an account of 10th to 17th century, but at that period of time, something details about Assam is very interesting. Okay, then here we see that during the travel of Ibn Battuta in India, he visited parts of Assam also. He also visited China. Okay, he took a ship to Sumatra and from there another ship to the Chinese port town. That means Ibn Battuta was a quite travel person and he traveled from place to place, or we can say country to country. See, here it is said, he traveled extensively in China, going far as Beijing, just did not stay for long, decided to return home in 1347. If we see his account, for example, let me show you. Here if we see, Ibn Battuta returned home in 1354, about 30 years after he set out. That means his journey was for about 30 years. Okay, he set out home in 1354 and then after 30 years he returned home back. Okay, if we see here, this is the map. You see place visited by Ibn Battuta in the Afghanistan. Okay, which are the places that he visited? This map shows the places that he visited in Afghanistan, Sindh and Punjab. Many of these place names have been spelled as Ibn Battuta would have known them. Okay, Tirmidh, Parwan, Kabul, Ghazna. There are so many places. Uja, Hansi, Delhi. This is Delhi. Okay, Multan. As we have seen in Multan and Uj, he traveled these places also. Okay. Then Abu Har, Sutlej. This is the river. There are so many places that he has visited. Let us go to the next part. We can see that education and environment. Okay, in the footstep, let us see what is there in the footstep of Ibn Battuta. In the century between 1400 and 1800, visitors to India wrote a number of travelers in Persian. At the same time, Indian visitors to Central Asia, Iran and Ottoman Empire also sometimes wrote about their experience. That means mostly in this chapter we come to know about what are the things or what are the things the traveler came to know or came to learn during their travel, during their visit at different periods of time. Here, these writers follow the footsteps of Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta. That means these were the travelers who travelled later the travel of Ibn Battuta and Al-Biruni, and therefore they also followed the footsteps of them only in order to learn new things, in order to get a good view of the country or the places. Among the best known writers were the Abu Razak. This is a very important part. Abu Abdul Razak Samarkandi, who visited South India in 1440s. We will get in details about him later on. Here it is very important, it might be there as a very important question, that who was the best known writers that visited South India at the 1400 century. Then we can say it is Abdul Razak Samarkandi, or we can say Abdul Razak. Okay. Then we have Muhammad Wali Balkhi, who travelled very widely in the 1620s, and the Sheikh Ali Hassin, who came to North India in 1740. See, mostly we see it as it is written. We have also come to know due to in different sources, okay, that historians have travelled from place to place, right from the south to north, right from the east to west. They have visited every corner of the country, of the subcontinent, in order to gain or in order to collect or in order to know what are the how the settlements begin, how the people live, what are their culture, what are their traditions, okay, in order to understand the society, the language and all other things. See, this is again a different image, an 18th century painting depicting travelers gathered around the campfire. See, this generally we do in this century also. We generally have a campfire, or wherever we visit, where we have a group of discussions, group of people gather together, and we can see, while looking into this picture, we can see maybe this is a tradition that came from them only, because here we see these people, these are the travelers, maybe from different parts of the world, maybe different parts of the country. They travel during, at that time we know there was no proper transportation process. Those they have to walk for a long distance, maybe in the forests, or maybe take the ship in the waters. So here we see these are the maybe the paddlers who travel through the forests, and then when they are tired, they gather together in a place, and then they have this campfire, and maybe they have a good discussion also. Okay, going to the next. This is another a very important traveler who visited the country India during the 17th century. Who is he? He is Francois Bernier. He was a doctor with a difference. Why is it called a doctor with a difference? We'll see when we go through the chapter. This is a 17th century painting depicting Bernier in European clothes, because he was a Frenchman. Okay, we can say it him Francois Bernier or the Frenchman. Once the Portuguese arrived in India in about 1500, a number of them wrote detailed accounts regarding Indian social customs and religious practices. That means some Portuguese travelers arrived in India during the 1500 century, and then they wrote accounts regarding Indian society or social customs and religious practices. A few of them, such as Jesuit Roberto Nobili, even translated Indian text into European languages. They were so much interested, they came to know so much new things, and then in order to spread it from person to person or spread it in the literature form, they translated these details in their own language. Among them was the best known Portuguese writer Durate Barbosa. Okay, this is a very another important question. Who wrote detailed account of the trade and society in South India? He, in his account, wrote about the detailed or traces of the trade and society of South India. Okay. Later, after 1600, we find growing numbers of Dutch, English and French travelers coming to India. Therefore, that means mostly all the people from Dutch, or we can say the Englishmen, then the French, okay, the Portuguese, they travel India at different periods of time. Okay, now let us see what is said about Francois Barnier. Francois Barnier was a Frenchman and was a doctor, political philosopher and historian. He had quite good interest in many of the things. Like many other, he came to the Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. Okay, he came to the Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. Maybe opportunities of work, or maybe opportunities of learning new things, or maybe opportunities of learning new languages. Okay, he was in India for 12 years. Okay, his period was for a small period of time, from 1656 to 1668, and was closely associated with the Mughal court, and a physician to Prince Dara Sukho, the eldest son of Emperor Shah Jahan. Okay, so he was mostly engaged with the Mughal court only. He worked as a physician for the oldest son of Shah Jahan, Dara Sukho. Okay, and then he also had a good contact with an American novelist, Danishmand Khan, at the Mughal court. Therefore, that means up till now, by knowing this part, we can say Francois Barnier had written or had mentioned about mostly the Mughal court only. Now, comparing East and West. Let us see what's there in comparing East and West. Barnier travelled to several parts of the country and wrote accounts of what he saw, frequently comparing what he saw in India with the situation in Europe. Okay, he dedicated his major writings of Louis XIV, the King of France. We are quite aware of the Louis XIV, the King of France. He was a very famous king, and many of his works were written in the form of letters to influential officers and ministers. He virtually in every instance described what he saw in India as a bleak situation in comparison to developments in Europe. Okay, he compared what were the developments that he can see in India that with the development that already had in Europe. That means we can say he compared the place, okay, the India to Europe. As we also see, his assessment was not always accurate. However, when his works were published, Barnier writing became extremely popular. Okay, assessment of Barnier was not that much authentic at that period of time, but later on when translation was done and the final account was open to the people, most of the things became quite popular. Okay, because we have seen, he have mentioned about the society, and when the things comes for the society, the things become very popular because the tradition, customs of different countries, of different places are different, and people are always curious to know something new. Next, if we see how was his work published, Barnier works were published in France in 1670 to 71 and translated into English, Dutch, German and Italian within the next 5 years. Between 1670s to 1725, his account was reprinted 8 times. Okay, it was reprinted again 8 times in France. That means the interest of the accounts was more in France, and therefore they have translated it for 8 times. And then this was in marked contrast to the account of Arabic and Persian, which circulated as manuscripts and were generally not published before 1800. Okay, in Sanskrit and in Persian and Arabic, it was later on published, but earlier it got more interest in the European country, or you can say in the European society. Okay. So this was what the most important thing in this chapter, that about 3 important travelers. Who were the travelers? First was Al-Biruni. Okay, he traveled in the 11th century. He discussed mostly about the culture, language, people. Okay, and he traveled entirely most of the parts of the country. Next was Ibn Battuta, who was a traveler from Morocco in the 14th century. He wrote about the trade, okay, about the, again, the culture, the tradition, the literature, and he believed that in order to get more experience in a language, or in a practically, he needs to visit rather than being surrounded by the books and learnings. And the third and the most not the least traveler was Francois Barnier, a Frenchman from Europe, or from France, who visited India in the 17th century, and he was mostly engaged to the Mughal court, and therefore most of his accounts were about the Mughal court only. Okay, and he served them as a physician to one of the son of Shah Jahan, and then he stayed there for a longer period of time. So now we'll discuss few objective questions from the chapter. So here I have taken only 8 questions. Which Portuguese writer provided a detailed account of trade and society in South India? So while going through the chapter, we came across the accounts of Portuguese travelers, writers, and they have written about the society in South India. Which particular traveler wrote this? It is B. Duret Barbusa. Okay, he wrote in his account about the society in South India. Okay, he wrote a detailed picture could be seen in his book, or in his account about the South Indian society of India. Okay, let us go to the next question. Okay, what's the next question? Which of the following was not want of barriers as discussed by Al-Biruni? Which of the following was not want of barriers of discussed by Al-Biruni? Which was not something which was not discussed by Al-Biruni in his book of account? Okay, so which option? It is slavery in the Eastern society. That means Al-Biruni never discussed anything about the slavery that was maybe practiced or may not be in the Eastern society. This thing was not there in his account. But apart from this, if we see language, yes, it definitely he has written things about language because he himself was interested in learning Sanskrit. Okay, then differences, religious beliefs and practices, yes, definitely he came to he came across certain practices in the society. So he talked about the society, different practices, religious beliefs, cultures. Okay, so this could be seen in his account. And then if we see number D, self-absorption and the resulting ignorance of the local population, yes, this was also there in his account. But this slavery in the Eastern society was not available in his account, or could not be seen in his account. Okay, let's go to the third question. Who wrote Kitabul Hind? This is as easy as anything. Who wrote Kitabul Hind? Whose book was Kitabul Hind? Al-Biruni, right? It is Al-Biruni, and his book of account, or the book that he wrote during his travel in the country with 80 chapters, and the book is Kitabul Hind. Okay, let's go to the next question. Which of the following statements is incorrect? Which of the following statement is incorrect? According to Ibn Battuta, the nuts of the coconut tree looked similar to a man's head. Yes, this is correct. It is, he has mentioned, because Ibn Battuta founded 2 new things in India, that is the palm leaf and the coconut, which he was not similar at all. Okay, then according to Barnier, the Indian peasantry was exploited by the landlords. Yes, this was also already there, because Al-Biruni already visited India in the 11th century, and Ibn Battuta visited India in the 14th century, just 3 centuries later. So this account was already there in the society. Third, Abdul Razak is perhaps the only historian who provided detailed account of work in the imperial karkhanas or the workshop. Yes, this is true. Ibn Battuta gave a detailed account of slavery in India. That means this is the correct answer. Okay, let us go to the next question. What are the subjects in which travelers compile their accounts? Okay. What are the subjects on which travelers compile their accounts? Travelers compile their accounts on affairs of the court, yes. Religious issues, definitely. Architecture, yes. All these three could be seen in the accounts of the travelers. That means all of the above is the correct answer. Moving to the next question. Who gave the most important description of Vijayanagara in the 15th century? This is a direct question and very prominently is there in the mention in the chapter. It is Abdul Razak. Okay, Abdul Razak discussed about the Vijayanagara kingdom in detail in his account. Moving to the next question. Which traveller came to India during the 17th century? This is again another very important and direct question. Which traveller came to India in the 17th century? If we look in the name of the chapter is said through the eyes of the travellers from 10th to 17th century. Therefore, that means the three travellers we have discussed here in the chapter. So, who was the third traveller who visited India in the 17th century? It is definitely Francois Bernier, isn't it? He travelled India in the 17th century. Okay, going back to the next and the last question. Who is the author of Rihala? This is again very important and a direct and easy question. Who is the author of Rihala? If we see in the accounts of Ibn Battuta, it is written only Ibn Battuta as and Rihala. That means this is the book which was compiled by Ibn Battuta, right? Rihala, or you can say it's Rihla, okay, whatever you pronounce. Rihla, this is the book or the account of Ibn Battuta where he has written about all the experiences that he had during the visit in the country and in the different parts of the other country. Okay. So, here we end with the questions session. There are more questions that we will discuss in the next class. Okay. Thank you so much.